Hey everyone, it's Sammy again and welcome to another of South Diary stories. I've not really been active here for a while because I and YouTube had an issue and a video of mine was eventually taken down. But I'll show you, sorted out, and I'm back here again for good. So please stay tuned and enjoy the story.
The elevator doors slid open and Emily stepped out, brown paper bag in hand, delivery receipt folded between two fingers. She checked the address again on her phone, room 404, then looked up at the hallway stretching in front of her. Someone from a place like this had ordered from their restaurant. A restaurant tucked between a laundromat and a phone repair shop downtown? She almost wanted to laugh. Rich people were strange. Emily adjusted the bag on her arm and started down the hall. She was wearing her usual, oversized black hoodie. She found room 404 and knocked twice. Nothing. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. She shifted her weight to her other foot, checked the time on her phone. She had 2 more deliveries after this one. She knocked a third time, putting a little more behind it. The door swung open, and Emily almost took a step back. The man standing in the doorway was Korean, tall, with dark hair that looked like he hadn't touched it in hours, sharp jaw, sharp eyes. He had a towel around his waist and nothing else. Nothing else. Emily blinked exactly once. He looked at her with eyes that were already tired before this moment, like the day had done something terrible to him and she was just the latest inconvenience in a very long list. Then he saw the delivery pack in her hand and understood what was happening. Wrong room, he said. And then he closed the door in her face. Emily stood there. She stared at the closed door. Then she looked down at the receipt in her hand. Room 404. Building name. Floor number. Everything matched. Everything. She looked back up at the door like it had personally offended her, which, as a matter of fact, it had. She knocked again. The door opened again, slower this time, and he looked at her with an expression that could only be described as please, not you. You again. Yes, me again, Emily said, her voice even, controlled, the way she kept it when she was about 2 seconds from losing it. Because I have the right room. You don't. Room 404, right? He said nothing. Right? She repeated. I didn't order anything. Well, someone at this address did, and that someone owes me for a delivery I carried 14 floors up, so. He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her with a specific kind of patience that wasn't really patience at all. It was the kind rich people used when they were deciding how quickly to dismiss you. Look, man, he said slowly, like he was explaining something to someone who was taking very long to understand. You should definitely stop this if you're playing games with me. I did not order food. I don't know what restaurant you're from. I don't know who sent you. So whatever this is, you need to take it somewhere else. Emily went still. Man. He blinked. She stared at him. He stared back. And then it landed. He thought she was a boy. He had looked at her hoodie, her cap, her build, and he had genuinely, completely, absolutely thought she was a boy standing at his door trying to scam him. Emily felt something rise in her chest. It was not amusement. It was not flattery. It was the very particular kind of irritation that came from being invisible in a way you hadn't consented to, and she channeled every drop of it into her next sentence. I'm not playing games with you, she said. And I'm not a man. He looked at her again. Properly this time. His eyes dropped briefly to the hoodie, back up to her face. Something shifted in his expression, but it didn't become an apology. It became, somehow, more impatient. Whoever you are, he said, you have the wrong room. And he moved to close the door again. Emily put her hand on it. She was stronger than she looked. People always underestimated that. She pushed the door open enough to step inside, and she stepped inside. I'm not leaving, she said, her voice low and absolutely serious, until you pay for this delivery. He turned around slowly, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening in his own apartment. You just walked into my home. And I will walk right back out the moment I get what I came for, Emily said. She set the bag down on the nearest surface with controlled precision. I've done too many deliveries for too many people who think because they live somewhere fancy they can mess with people who work for a living. I'm not the one. So either you pay, or I stand here until you do. Lee Juk looked at her. She looked back at him, arms crossed, jaw set. He looked like he was running a calculation in his head. Something along the lines of whether fighting this woman further was worth the energy he clearly did not have. Whatever the result was, it seemed to land on no. He reached for his phone on the counter without another word, tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward her. A payment confirmation. The full amount plus the delivery fee. There, he said, his voice flat as a still lake. Now get out. And take your delivery with you. Emily looked at the screen. Then she looked at him. He was already looking away, already done with her, already moving back toward whatever part of his day she had interrupted. She picked up nothing. She left the bag exactly where she had set it down. She turned and walked out of his apartment without a single word, without a single glance back, and she did not exhale until she was back in the elevator, the doors sliding shut between her and floor 14. She let out a long, slow breath. Then her phone rang. She answered it. Hello? It was Su Yang, her co-worker, and she sounded nervous in the specific way she sounded when she had done something wrong and needed to deliver the news at a safe distance. So, about the delivery you just did. Emily felt something tighten at the base of her spine. What about it? A pause. We got the building name wrong. The elevator continued its descent. Say that again, Emily said, very carefully. The order was for the Imperial Plaza. We sent you to the Imperial Grand. They're both on the same street and Kofi wrote it down wrong on the receipt and I just realized when the real building called to ask where their delivery was. Emily was no longer listening. She was standing in the lobby of the wrong building, staring at nothing, her brain replaying the last 20 minutes like a film she wanted to return for a refund. She had walked into a stranger's apartment uninvited. She had forced him to pay for food he had never ordered. She had left said food behind and walked away like she had won something. The shame hit her so hard and so fast that she had to put one hand on the wall just to anchor herself. Emily, are you there? I'll call you back, she said, and hung up. She stood there for a long moment, the lobby echoing around her, the security desk to her left, the elevator bank to her right. She thought about just leaving, going back to the restaurant, explaining to the manager, letting the business deal with it on a corporate level, never thinking about room 404 or the very irritated Korean man with the towel and the sharp jaw ever again. She thought about it. Then she turned around and got back in the elevator. Because no matter how humiliating this was going to be, she could not be the kind of person who took money from someone who hadn't owed her anything and simply disappeared. She just couldn't. She knocked on the door of room 404 for the 4th time since she got back up. Silence. She knocked again, softer this time. Still nothing. She pressed her ear close to the door without touching it. She didn't know what she was listening for exactly. Just some sign that he was in there and simply refusing to answer out of entirely reasonable spite. What she heard made every hair on her arms stand up. It was low, barely audible. A groan, the kind that didn't come from annoyance or sleep. The kind that came from pain. Emily's hand found the door handle. It wasn't locked. She pushed it open slowly. Hello? Sir, I just need to tell you something. I'm not here to cause trouble, She stopped. Lee Juk was on the floor. Not sitting. Not resting. He was collapsed face down near the foot of the sofa, one arm stretched out in front of him, completely still except for the shallow, uneven rise of his back. There was foam at the corner of his mouth. Emily was across the room before she finished the thought. She dropped to her knees beside him, 2 fingers pressed to his neck. Pulse. There was a pulse, but it was wrong, thin, and stuttering in a way that made her stomach turn. Hey. She touched his shoulder. Hey, wake up. Hey. Nothing. She grabbed her phone and dialed emergency services, and when the operator picked up, her voice was the steadiest it had ever been, because someone had to be, because he couldn't be, because there was no one else here. I need an ambulance at Imperial Grand, 14th floor, room 404. A man is unconscious. There's foam around his mouth. His pulse is weak. Please hurry. She stayed on the floor beside him until she heard the elevator doors open down the hall. She stayed until the paramedics came through the door she'd left open. She stayed until they lifted him onto the stretcher, and she followed them out into the hall and watched the elevator close between them with a feeling in her chest she could not name. Then she sank against the wall, slid down it until she was sitting on the floor of the corridor, and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. He had been poisoned. That was the word the paramedic had used before the doors closed. They weren't certain yet, but the presentation was consistent with poisoning. She hadn't heard anything after that. Emily returned to the restaurant. She told her manager everything, the wrong address, the forced payment, the man on the floor, all of it, in a voice that was impressively steady for someone whose hands wouldn't stop shaking. Her manager looked horrified. Her coworkers looked at the floor. She went home that night and sat on the edge of her bed, still in her hoodie, still in her delivery shoes, and stared at the wall. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat. She just sat there and wondered if he had made it. Whether somewhere across the city, in a hospital she didn't know the name of, the man was still alive. She still didn't know his name then. She would learn it the next day, but not the way she had wanted to. The police came to her workplace at 11:47 in the morning. Emily was in the middle of a delivery handoff when she saw them walk in, 2 officers. The kind of serious that meant this was not a routine check. Her manager went pale. Her co-workers went still. One of the officers looked directly at her. Emily Shawn. Her stomach dropped. Yes. You need to come with us. Why bag and walk toward them? Can I ask what this is about? You're being brought in for questioning in connection with the poisoning of Lee Juk. The name hit her like something physical. So that was who he was. Lee Juk. I didn't poison anyone, she said immediately. That's what they all say, the second officer said, not unkindly, just factually, and that somehow made it worse. At the station, they laid it out for her. The CCTV footage from the Imperial Grand showed her entering the building, taking the elevator to the 14th floor, entering room 404, and leaving approximately 18 minutes later. It also showed that Lee Juk had not placed any food order that evening, which meant the only question anyone wanted answered was, why was she there? She told them everything. The wrong address, the co-worker's mistake, the payment, the delivery left behind, going back, finding him on the floor, calling for help. She told them all of it. Then she turned to her manager, who was seated at the edge of the room, and she looked at him with eyes that were asking a very simple question. Tell them. Please. Just tell them. Her manager looked at his hands. Her co-worker Su Yang, who was also there, looked at the wall. No one spoke. The room went very quiet. Emily sat in a detention cell for the first time in her 26 years of life, and she did not cry, not right away. She sat on the narrow bench, her hands in her lap, and she thought about every decision that had led her to this moment and tried to figure out which one she would undo if she could. By nightfall, she was crying. Not loudly, just quietly, in the way you cried when you were too tired to fight it anymore and there was no one around to see you fall apart anyway. She had no family here. There was no one to call. Her mother had died when she was 15, and since then it had just been Emily, moving through the world alone, building herself from whatever materials were available, working jobs that wore her down, sending money back to nobody because there was no nobody to send it to. Just surviving. Day after day. And now, here she was, surviving in a detention cell for a crime she had not committed, and there was not a single person in the city who was coming for her. She was there for 2 days. By the morning of the third day, she had stopped expecting anything. She sat on the bench with her knees drawn up and her eyes fixed on the floor, and she told herself, quietly and firmly, that she was going to have to figure out how to handle whatever came next alone, the same way she had handled everything else. Then the officer appeared at the door. You have a visitor. Emily looked up slowly. She genuinely could not think of a single person it could be. She walked out into the visitors area, and she saw him. Lee Juk. He was sitting at the table with a stillness that looked like it cost him something, because he was still visibly unwell, the hollowness around his eyes, the careful way he held himself, like he was being very deliberate about not showing how much effort this had taken. But he was here. He was alive. He was sitting right there in the plastic chair looking at her. Something in Emily's chest gave way all at once. She didn't plan it. She didn't decide to do it. She walked toward him, and her knees buckled somewhere in the middle of the room, and she went down, just went down, right there on the floor, and the sob that came out of her was the kind she had been holding in for 3 days, and it did not come quietly. Lee Juk was out of his chair and beside her before she registered him moving. She reached out, grabbed the front of his jacket without thinking, and pulled him in, and he let her, and he stayed, kneeling on the floor of a police station visitor's room with a woman he had met under the worst possible circumstances, not saying anything, not pulling away, just staying. She cried until she couldn't anymore. When the storm finally passed and she was just sitting there, wrung out and exhausted and slightly embarrassed, he sat back and looked at her. I know who poisoned me, he said. She looked up. And when they found out I survived, he continued, his voice low and even. They needed someone to blame. You were convenient. The footage, the wrong address, the payment with no order record. It looked bad. It looked very bad, Emily said, her voice cracked and raw. I know. He held her gaze. I'm going to fix it. She stared at him. You don't owe me anything. I basically broke into your apartment. You also saved my life, he said simply. If you hadn't come back when you did, I would have been there alone for hours. I wouldn't have made it. He paused. So yes, I do owe you. And I pay my debts. Emily searched his face for something to tell her this was temporary, that once he walked out of here it would be back to just her and the very long road ahead. She found nothing like that. What she found instead was completely steady. Promise me, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Promise me you'll get me out of this. Something moved through his expression. He nodded once. Count on me. Then, after a pause, the corner of his mouth shifted, just barely. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry for calling you a man the first time we met. I understand now why that made you angrier than everything else combined. Emily looked at him. And then, for the first time in 3 days, she laughed. It came out surprised and genuine and a little broken around the edges, the way laughter did when it hadn't been used in a while. Lee Juk watched it happen, and something in his expression changed in a way he probably didn't notice. Thank you, Emily said, when she caught her breath. For surviving. Because if you hadn't, there would be no one on my side. He looked at her for a moment, something quiet and serious in his eyes. You're not alone in this, he said. He came back the next day. Emily was sitting on the bench in the same position she always sat in, knees up, back against the wall, when the officer told her she had a visitor again. She walked out expecting maybe a lawyer, someone official, someone Lee Juk had sent on his behalf, because surely a man like him had better things to do than sit in a police station visitor's room 2 days in a row. But it was him. He was sitting in the same plastic chair, jacket different today, looking marginally better than yesterday, a paper bag on the table in front of him. Emily stopped walking for just a second. Then she sat down across from him. You came back, she said. I said count on me, he replied, like that explained everything, and pushed the paper bag toward her. Eat. You look like you haven't eaten properly in days. I haven't eaten properly in days, she said, looking into the bag. Rice. Soup. The real kind, not whatever the facility had been offering. Her stomach responded before her pride could say anything, and she picked up the container. How are you feeling? She asked between bites. Better, he said. The doctors say I'm recovering faster than expected. Good. She looked up at him. That's good. He was watching her eat with an expression she couldn't fully read, somewhere between satisfied and thoughtful, like he was solving something in his head and the pieces were slowly arranging themselves. Your lawyer will be at the hearing, he said. I've already briefed him. He's handled cases far more complicated than this one. Emily set down her spoon. Lee Juk. He looked at her. I don't have money to pay for a lawyer like that. I'm not asking you to, he said. I can't let you. Emily. His voice was not loud. It was not sharp. It was simply final in the way that certain people's voices were final, the kind that came from years of being listened to and meaning every word. Let me do this. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked her spoon back up. Fine, she said. But I'm paying you back. Every cent. Noted, he said, and there was something almost like amusement in his eyes that he was keeping carefully contained. He came the day after that too. And the day after that. Every single day, without fail, Lee Juk appeared in that visitor's room with food and updates and a calm that Emily had started to depend on in a way that alarmed her slightly. He would tell her what the lawyer had found, what evidence was being compiled, what the next step was. And when the legal updates were finished, they would just talk. She learned things. He had a dry humor that appeared without warning and disappeared just as fast, the kind you missed if you weren't paying attention. He asked questions and then actually listened to the answers, which, in Emily's experience, was rarer than people admitted. He remembered everything she said. Every small detail. She mentioned once that she couldn't stand the smell of instant noodles and she preferred the properly cooked ones, and the next day he showed up with a flask of properly cooked noodles. She smiled so widely every time she saw him walk in that she stopped being able to pretend she wasn't doing it. He always felt something shift in his chest when she did. Neither of them said anything about that. The day she was bailed out, the morning air outside hit her like something she had forgotten was free. She stood on the pavement outside the building and just breathed it in. The noise of the city, the smell of exhaust and street food and concrete warming up in the sun, all of it, the ordinary overwhelming aliveness of the world outside. Her eyes filled before she could stop them. She hadn't expected that. She had held herself together through the whole process, through signing the release papers, through the formal language and the cold fluorescent lights, and it was a simple feeling of outside air on her face that undid her completely. She heard footsteps on the pavement. She turned. Lee Juk was leaning against a car parked directly across from the entrance, jacket on, hands in his pockets, watching her with the same steady expression he always had. Like he had nowhere else to be. Like he had planned to be exactly here. Emily crossed the pavement and walked straight into him. She hugged him the way you hugged someone when you meant it with your whole body. Her face pressed against his shoulder, her arms around him, and she said thank you into his jacket quietly and fiercely and with everything she had. His arms came up and he held her, one hand moving slowly across her back, and he let her stand there for as long as she needed. Okay, he said finally, pulling back just enough to look at her face. He reached out and brushed a tear from her cheekbone with his thumb, matter of fact, like it was the most natural thing, and she let him. Let's go. Go where? She asked. My apartment. She blinked. What? It's not safe for you to be alone right now, he said, already moving toward the driver's side. The person who did this is still out there. Until this is resolved, you're staying with me. Emily stood by the passenger door. You can't just decide that. I just did, he said, and got in. She stood there. Then she got in too. She told herself it was only because he was right about the safety concern. She ignored the part of her that was simply glad to have somewhere to go that wasn't back to the apartment where she had spent hours staring at the ceiling wondering if she was going to prison. She ignored the part that was glad it was his apartment specifically. The drive was quiet in a comfortable way. The city moved past the windows and Emily watched it, her hands folded in her lap, the tension slowly releasing from her shoulders in increments. What do I do now? She asked, more to herself than to him. What do you mean? My job, she said. I can't go back there. They let me get arrested rather than back up my story. That's done. She stared at the passing street. I don't have savings. Not enough to last. I don't have family here. I don't have a plan. Lee Juk was quiet for a moment. You don't have to worry about any of that, he said. She turned to look at him. That's easy to say when. Emily. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. I'll take care of it. Whatever you need. I mean that. She turned back to the window. She felt something move through her chest, warm and inconvenient, and she pressed her lips together and said nothing. His apartment was not what she had expected, and she had expected something impressive. It was more than impressive. It was the kind of space that felt designed not just to be lived in but to be felt. She stood in the entryway and tried very hard not to look like someone who had never been anywhere this nice. She failed, probably. Lee Juk showed her to a room down the hall. He opened the door and stepped back, and Emily stepped in and stopped. It was magnificent. A proper bed, the kind with actual depth to it, white linen, pillows that looked like they had never had a bad night in their lives. A window that looked out over the city from a height that made everything below look like a model. A bathroom visible through the door on the left, with actual bath salts on the shelf and towels folded like something from a catalogue. This is mine? She asked. For as long as you need, he said. She turned to say something and found that he was already pulling the door closed behind him, quietly, giving her the space before she even asked for it. Emily stood in the middle of that room alone and pressed the back of her wrist against her mouth. She was not going to cry again. She had used up her crying allocation for the month. She ran a bath instead, and sank into it, and let herself be still for the first time in what felt like a very long time. She slept. Real sleep, deep and dark and dreamless, the kind her body had been starving for. She slept until the city outside had gone quiet and the light through the window had shifted to the deep blue of well past midnight. She woke up thirsty. She pulled on the robe hanging on the back of the door, soft and white and completely excessive, and padded out into the hallway in her socks. The apartment was still. She found the kitchen by following the thin line of light under the door. She pushed it open. Lee Juk was sitting at the kitchen island, both hands wrapped around a mug, staring at nothing. He was in a plain t-shirt and sweats, and without the jacket and the careful composure of the daytime, he looked younger. And tireder. And like whatever was in his head right now was very heavy. He looked up when she came in. Sorry, she said. I just came for water. It's your kitchen too, he said. For now. She filled a glass at the sink and then, instead of going back to bed, she sat down at the island across from him. She wasn't sure why. It just seemed wrong to leave him sitting there alone in the middle of the night with that expression on his face. You're not sleeping either, she said. No. What are you thinking about? He looked at his mug for a moment. Then he set it down. My stepmother, he said. Emily was quiet, listening. She married my father 8 years ago, Lee Juk said. He was good. Genuinely good, the kind of man who believed the best about people right up until there was no room left to believe it. He trusted her. Left her and her son provision in his will when he died last year. He paused. That wasn't enough for her. It was never going to be enough. She wanted the company. She's been trying since before he was even gone. Emily watched his face. He was keeping his voice level, the way people did when the thing they were talking about was too big to talk about at full volume, when you had to keep it contained or risk it getting away from you completely. The poison was in my sleeping pills, he continued. I'd been taking them for months due to stress. She had someone switch them out. Emily thought about the foam at the corner of his mouth. The way his pulse had felt under her fingers. Thin and stuttering. Lee Juk, she said. He looked up. I'm sorry, she said. I mean about your father. And about the fact that the people who were supposed to be family are the ones who did this. Something shifted in his expression. Something that had been held very tightly. It's a particular kind of loneliness, he said quietly, when the people inside your house are the threat. Emily nodded slowly. I know something about that kind of lonely, she said. Not that kind exactly. Mine was more just absence. She turned the glass in her hands. My mother died when I was 15. There was no one after that. I just kept moving forward because there wasn't really another option, but there was never anyone in my corner. Not really. You just get used to handling everything yourself and you stop expecting otherwise. The kitchen was very quiet. That's exhausting, Lee Juk said. It really is, Emily agreed. They sat with that for a moment, the particular comfortable silence of two people who had just told each other something true. Can I ask you something terrible? Emily said. He raised an eyebrow. Does she make good Kim Kai? Your stepmother? Because if someone is going to ruin my life, I at least want them to have some kind of redeeming quality. Lee Juk stared at her. Then he laughed. A real laugh, the sudden unguarded kind, and he dropped his head briefly before bringing it back up, shaking it slowly. That is a terrible thing to ask. I know, Emily said, grinning. No, he said, still laughing quietly. Apparently she cannot cook at all. Her son told me once when he was young enough to still accidentally tell the truth. Tragic, Emily said solemnly. Criminal in two ways. He was still smiling when the laughter faded, looking at her across the kitchen island with an expression she couldn't entirely name, something warm and a little bit wondering. You're strange, he said. You're strange too, she replied. Who sits alone in their kitchen at 2 a.m. thinking about their terrible stepmother? The same person who forces their way into a stranger's apartment over delivery, he said. That was a completely reasonable business decision, Emily said. It really wasn't. You got your money back though. I got it back because I paid for food I didn't order. Details, Emily said, waving her hand, and he shook his head again, and they were both laughing now, quietly, in the way people laughed in kitchens in the middle of the night when the world was asleep and the guards came down. When it settled, the quiet that came after was different from before. Softer. Emily was looking at the surface of the island, turning her glass in slow circles, and she was thinking, without meaning to think it, about how strange it was to feel this safe in a place she had only arrived in hours ago. About how strange it was to feel this known by someone she had met less than 2 weeks ago under circumstances that should have made them strangers in the worst possible way. She looked up. He was already looking at her. Can I kiss you? She said. The words came out before the thought had fully finished forming, which was, objectively, mortifying, and her brain registered this approximately 1 second after her mouth had already delivered the sentence into the world with no way to retrieve it. Forget it, she said immediately, looking back down at the glass. That came out wrong. I didn't mean to say that out loud. You can completely ignore. I want to too, he said. She looked up. He was already leaning across the island. She met him halfway. It was not like anything dramatic or cinematic or dizzying. It was quiet and warm and completely certain, like something that had been decided a while ago and was only now being acknowledged. His hand came up and touched the side of her face, and she closed her eyes, and the kitchen at 2 a.m. felt for a moment like the only room in the world. When they pulled apart, neither of them said anything. Emily looked at him for a moment. We should say good night, she said, quietly. Yeah, good night, he said. She went back down the hall. She lay down on the white linen bed and stared at the ceiling with a smile she couldn't do anything about. Across the apartment, Lee Juk sat back down at the kitchen island, put his face in his hands, and stayed like that for a very long moment. The first trial came. Lee Juk's lawyer was everything he had promised, methodical, precise, the kind of legal mind that presented evidence the way a surgeon presented instruments, deliberately, purposefully, with absolute confidence in what each piece was for. He laid out the timeline of the wrong delivery address, the payment record, the call Emily made to emergency services, the 3-minute gap between her leaving and the ambulance arriving, which would have been physically impossible to stage if she were the one who had poisoned him. The date for the final trial was set. Emily sat in the car afterward, her hands in her lap, and Lee Juk watched her fingers shaking against her knee. Not dramatically. Just the small tremor of someone who had been holding it together very tightly for a very long time and whose body was beginning to report the cost. He reached over and covered her hands with his. She didn't pull away. I'm scared, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. What if it's not enough? What if they still find me guilty? What if... Emily. She stopped. He was already turning the car around. Where are we going? She asked. Don't you have work? I have work every day, he said. Right now is more important. She looked at him. 20 minutes later they were standing in front of a bowling alley. Emily looked at the sign. She looked at him. Bowling. Bowling, he confirmed. completely unbothered. Lee Juk, I just came from a court hearing. I know. You need to think about something else or you're going to drive yourself into the ground. He was already walking toward the entrance. Also, for the record, I'm very good at this. Oh, that's a challenge, Emily said, following him despite herself. It was very much a challenge. He was annoyingly good. Frame after frame, strike after strike, delivering each one with the calm of someone who had never once doubted that the pins would fall exactly as he intended. Emily, who was competitive in a way that she considered one of her better qualities, found herself getting progressively more invested in a bowling game she had walked into 10 minutes ago wearing court clothes. She got better as the game went on. She found her rhythm. And in finding her rhythm she also, somewhere between the 5th and 8th frame, stopped thinking about the trial. She was just bowling. She was just laughing at his commentary. She was just trying to beat a man who was insufferably good at knocking things down. The last frame. She needed a strike to win. She picked up the ball. She lined up. She breathed. She bowled. Gutter ball. Left side. Completely undignified. She stared at the lane. Lee Juk picked up his ball, stepped up beside her, and bowled. 4 pins. She turned to look at him. He was looking at the lane with an expression of completely unconvincing disappointment. He said. Unfortunate. Emily looked at the 4 standing pins. She looked at him. She looked at his score on the board, which showed a man who had been hitting strikes with robotic consistency suddenly, mysteriously, bowling a 4 on the final frame. You did that on purpose, she said. I don't know what you're talking about. Lee Juk. Gutters happen to everyone. Not to you. She was already laughing, pointing at him. You haven't missed a single pin this entire game and suddenly on the last frame you bowl a 4. He maintained his expression for exactly 2 more seconds. Then he looked at her and said, perfectly evenly, you needed the win more than I did. Emily laughed so hard she had to put her hand on the ball return to stay upright. He watched her with his arms crossed and something extraordinarily fond in his eyes that he wasn't doing anything to hide. She won. Technically. Barely. She was at the top of the world about it. And she did not think about the trial again until she was home. The final day came. Emily sat in the courtroom in the best clothes Lee Juk had quietly arranged for her back straight, her hands folded, and she looked straight ahead. He was 2 rows behind her. She couldn't see him, but she knew exactly where he was because she had checked when she sat down and she had not needed to look again. Knowing was enough. The lawyer presented everything. Every piece. The medical records. The toxicology report showing the substance had been in Lee Juk's system for days before Emily ever knocked on his door. The testimony of the paramedic who confirmed her call had come in while the substance was still at a survivable level. The phone records. The delivery error documentation. All of it, laid out with the clean, quiet certainty of the truth, which, when given enough space and the right voice, had a way of being remarkably convincing. The verdict came. She was confirmed not guilty. Emily heard it and felt her entire body release something it had been holding for weeks, like a fist finally opening. Her eyes filled immediately and spilled over before she could do anything about it, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth and breathed through it, in and out, until she could trust herself to stand. She stood. She turned. Lee Juk was already moving toward her from the 2nd row and she didn't wait. She walked straight into his arms, and he held her there in the middle of the courtroom while everything else reorganized itself around them. It's over, he said quietly, against her hair. Yes, it's over, she agreed, and her voice only broke a little. Within the hour, Lee Juk had the warrant. His stepmother was taken into custody before the end of the day. The evidence against her was thorough, not just the poisoning, but the financial maneuvering, the forged documents, the full picture of what she had been doing to Lee Juk's father's company since before his father was even gone. She was going to trial herself now, facing real consequences for real crimes, and there was nothing elegant or escapable about it. Lee Juk stood outside the building afterward, Emily beside him, watching the city the way people watched it after something large had ended. How do you feel? Emily asked. He was quiet for a moment. Like something has been lifted, he said. Like I can breathe in the direction of the future again. Emily nodded. She understood that feeling exactly. She won't win, Emily said. At trial. She won't. No, he agreed. She won't. They stood there a moment longer. Then Emily said, I want to open a restaurant. He turned to look at her. She was already looking at him, chin level, the way she held herself when she was saying something she had decided and was not asking permission for. It's what I've always wanted. My own place, my own food, my own rules. I was working that delivery job because it was the closest I could get to kitchens and still pay rent. She exhaled. I want to stop being close to it. I want to actually do it. Lee Juk looked at her for a long moment. Then do it, he said. Just like that. Why not just like that? Because starting a restaurant requires. I know what it requires, he said. I also know you. And I have not once, not for a single moment since the night I met you, had any doubt about what you're capable of when you decide to do something. He held her gaze. So do it. I'll help however you need. The rest is yours. Emily looked at him. She thought about the girl who had been 15 and completely alone in the world, who had eaten instant noodles for a week despite hating it, because she had $300 and needed it to last a month, who had delivered food to people in buildings she would never be invited into, who had sat in a detention cell and believed, for 3 long days, that no one was coming. She thought about how wrong that had been. She thought about the man standing in front of her, who had showed up every single day without being asked, who had held her hands when they shook, who had let her win at bowling and not even pretended he hadn't. She had spent so long alone that she had stopped believing this was something that happened to people like her. Someone choosing her. Someone staying. Lee Juk, she said. Thank you, she said. Not just for the lawyer and the bail and the bowling. For all of it. For not letting me disappear. He looked at her with the particular expression she had learned to recognize, the one that came and went so quickly you could miss it if you weren't paying attention, something soft and certain underneath the composure. You make it very easy, he said simply. She reached out and took his hand, and he laced his fingers through hers, and they stood there together in the afternoon sun as the city moved around them, loud and indifferent and completely unaware that something important had just settled into place. She opened the restaurant 6 months later. It was small at first, honest and warm, the kind of place where the food arrived the way food was supposed to arrive, tasting like someone had meant it. Word spread the way it always spread about places that were genuinely good. Within 3 months there was a wait list. Within 6 there was a second location being planned. Emily stood behind the counter of her restaurant on an ordinary Tuesday evening and looked out at the tables, at the people eating her food, at the warm light that she had chosen herself bouncing off walls that were hers, in a space that was hers, built from a life that was finally, undeniably, entirely hers. Lee Juk came in at 7:30, the way he usually did when she closed on Tuesdays, slipping in through the side door, settling at the corner table she kept clear for him without advertising the fact that she kept it clear for him. He picked up the menu out of habit even though he knew it by memory, because he always said reading it felt respectful. She came out from behind the counter and dropped into the seat across from him, pulling her apron off. Good night, he asked. Fully booked, she said, leaning back. 3rd Tuesday in a row. I'm not surprised, he said. You never are, she said. It's a little annoying, actually. You want me to be surprised. I want you to at least pretend to be impressed occasionally. I'm always impressed, he said. I'm just not surprised. There's a difference. Emily shook her head, smiling in spite of herself. He watched her the way he always watched her, steady and warm and entirely unbothered about the fact that he was doing it. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Just thinking about the first night I met you. Oh, please don't. You barged into my apartment. I had the wrong building. Technically I was the victim. You forced me to pay for food I didn't order. You got a refund. And then you left the food anyway. The food was a gift, Emily said with great dignity. You're welcome. He laughed then, real and unguarded the way his laugh always was when she caught him off guard, and Emily felt the warmth of it settle in her chest like it always did, familiar and certain, the feeling of something that had been chosen and kept choosing itself every day since. You know, she said, leaning forward on her elbows. When I walked up to that door and you pissed me off, I thought whoever lived there must be the most unpleasant human being on the planet. You weren't wrong, he said. I was wrong, she said. Almost completely. He met her eyes. Almost. You're still a little unpleasant, she said. I find it charming. Don't let it go to your head. He shook his head slowly, smiling in that contained way he had, the smile that lived mostly in his eyes. You saved my life, he said quietly, after a moment. Not for the first time. But the way he said it, it never felt like repetition. It always felt like the first time he was fully allowing himself to mean it. You saved mine back, she said. We're even. Are we? She considered that. No, she admitted. You're probably still ahead. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the way he had in the car after the first hearing, easy and certain, like it was simply where his hand was supposed to be. Then I'll keep going until we're even, he said. Emily turned her hand over under his and held it. Outside, the city was doing what cities did, moving and loud and relentlessly itself. Inside the restaurant she had built, in the life she had rebuilt, with the person who had stayed when he had absolutely no obligation to, Emily was, for the first time in as long as she could remember, exactly where she was supposed to be. No longer alone in the world. Not even a little. And that is the story of the wrong address that became the right one. Emily didn't come from money. She didn't have family or connections or anyone waiting to catch her. She had herself. And she had showed up for herself every single day until the day someone else decided to show up too. That is the thing about surviving long enough. You make it to the doors you were always meant to walk through. Sometimes you have to knock 4 times to get there, and sometimes the person on the other side is going to think you're a man, but you keep going anyway. If this story found you right when you needed it, hit that like button and let this reach someone else who needs it too. Subscribe so you never miss the next story, and drop a comment below telling me, was it the bowling scene or the kitchen kiss that got you? I need to know. See you in the next one.